Okay, it looks like we're live.
Excellent.
So I guess this is our Tuesday nights used to be Red Reviews, but we are not doing Red Reviews anymore, which patrons will know the details of that. We'll talk about that maybe in the after show or what have you. But until, or maybe ongoing even once Red Reviews comes back, this is going to be what I'm calling loose wires. We're going to go through some kind of news items that seem relevant to progressives, leftists, anarchists, people with my philosophical take, and I'm joined by AnComSciComm.
Hello.
How's it going?
Doing great. Great to be here tonight.
Right on. I appreciate you joining me on this. I hope that this works out. We can do this regularly, and this is a good, I guess, method of exploring the world through an
Indeed.
anarchist lens.
Yeah, should be a great time.
So I guess I've got 5 main stories I want to talk about, and I guess we'll just kind of get into them.
All right, sounds good.
So my first story that I was looking at was the U.S. government's efforts to suppress pro-Palestinian activism reached a disturbing new level with recent ICE detentions of Colombia-affiliated protesters. Palestinian student Mohsen Madawi was detained for over 2 weeks after being arrested during his citizenship interview, but was released on April 30th after a federal judge criticized the politically motivated nature of his detention. Meanwhile, Lika Cordia remains in custody despite her charges being dropped, as ICE moves to deport her using records shared by the NYPD, which is a violation of New York City's sanctuary laws. The targeting of Palestinian voices through immigration enforcement reflects an increasing authoritarian response to campus protest and dissent.
Yeah. I mean, they've been going after universities all over the place. It's just Columbia has a history, at least in this particular movement, of being the loudest and the most active, likely because it just happens to be where a lot of Palestinian students ended up going. So I don't know precisely why that is. It's also in the middle of Manhattan. So it's just a very active place, and in the middle of an extremely multiculturalist region. So you tend to get a lot of people of all sorts there, and I guess we're just seeing a lot of Palestinians at that school, and unfortunately, that makes it a hub for where a lot of these things are happening. But you also see this at a lot of, Ivy League schools in the Northeast, like Harvard's been pretty heavily hit by this. Tufts University is a pretty big one. The name of the person I'm now forgetting, but like even XKCD, which is normally an extremely non-political webcomic, even they made a webcomic about this because the author of that webcomic, Randall Monroe, lives in Somerville, Massachusetts, which is where Tufts University is located. So, like, this was literally, it happened in his town.
Right.
And, we're seeing, doctoral candidates and, all sorts of different academics being snatched up in broad daylight by ICE and, going through extra legal deportation procedures, many of which either never see a judge, or for the few who do see a judge, a lot of them are just disregarding those judges' orders. Kilmar Abrego Garcia being a big one that, there have been a lot of talks about. So, like, this is just more in an ongoing epidemic of, nationalist, xenophobic violence being enacted by the government against people who are using their ostensible rights to free speech as a way to target them, even if they're here legally. Most of the people who have been gathered up by ICE in this latest set of raids and deportations and capturings have all been here legally. They have legal visas, or they have legal green cards, or in at least one case, they were a literal U.S. citizen.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet somehow they still get deported.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild. Like, I was actually kind of shocked when I read that Madawi was released after being held for 2 weeks, when so many people seem to be getting shipped off to El Salvador.
Yeah. Yeah, and then of course we have the situation of New York City being a sanctuary city and having laws in place to prevent the kind of cooperation between city officials and law enforcement and the federal level, and now we're seeing the NYPD just flagrantly violating that. Which, I mean, cops do what cops do. They're gonna do this shit, but the fact that New York is pretty famous for being one of the first sanctuary cities. I think maybe San Francisco was actually the first, but I don't remember the timeline. But New York's probably the biggest one, given that it's the biggest city in America.
Right.
So the fact that the cops there are just saying, fuck it, we're gonna cooperate with this xenophobic, hate-filled bullshit. Not a great sign of where where we're going. You would expect in a state like New York, which and especially in New York City, where these things tend to lean pretty heavily Democratic, and they tend to have more protections for immigrants and other marginalized groups, that we're still seeing this happen on such a regular basis. And it's like, yeah, it's, if you live in a heavily blue state like New York or Massachusetts or California, in theory that may offer you a bit of protection, but with the federal government being so aggressive in its actions, it doesn't seem to matter where you live. The biggest thing right now is, are you an immigrant? If you are, you have basically been stripped of your free speech rights, because if you rock the boat in even the tiniest way, you're going to get deported, whether or not you are supposed to, whether or not it's even legal to deport you. You're probably going to get deported, and chances are it's not going to be back to your home country.
Yeah, like you say, they've even arrested and deported actual U.S. citizens. So if you're an immigrant, you're even less likely to be you have no protection at all, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so pretty wild. There was a couple things. Yeah, Lika Cordia was charged with, I had it written down here somewhere. But anyway, she was charged with something, and the charges were actually dropped, and yet ICE is still holding her under the supposedly as a criminal who needs to be deported because she broke the law. It's like they take the stance that even though the charges didn't stay, she still was considered a criminal.
Yeah.
I've got a few talking points that I picked up from right wingers.
Mm-hmm.
So they're framing the detentions as necessary for national security and protecting U.S. foreign policy interests.
What fucking interest? When they say shit like this, I'm like, could you please just be a little bit more specific? Because, I'm not necessarily asking for state secrets, but you shouldn't have to invoke or reveal state secrets to tell us, give us a general idea of what particular threat these people are to national security. Do you have evidence that they are directly coordinating with terrorists? Do you have evidence that they are aiding terrorists in some way, or providing a touch point for terrorist groups? Or is it just the fact that they don't say what you like, and you're coming up with bullshit excuses to violate basic constitutional freedoms and protections that, ironically enough, the right is always harping on about as,
Yeah.
they want to protect. Like, no, they don't. They do not want to protect freedom of speech. They want to protect freedom of their speech. Rules for
Yeah.
thee and not for me. That's their motto. They'll never say it, or, in the rare case they will believe them, but, it's not something that they're going to come right out and say, but it's absolutely what they seem to believe, because, like, it's the only way to explain this incredibly asymmetric enforcement of these standards. You want freedom of speech to say all the hateful bullshit you want to say, fine. I honestly go for it. The more you say it out loud, the more I know to avoid you.
Right.
But, if you're going to start arresting and deporting people for speaking their mind on a situation where the U.S. is actively assisting in a mass, some people will probably cringe if I call it a genocide, but I can't think of a better word for it, mass
Right.
murder,
Yeah.
of Palestinian people, and a massive, theft of land that was, fought for and clawed back from the jaws of Israeli colonialism. Like, yeah, like, people should have the ability to say these things, to express their opinions on these matters without being labeled a fucking terrorist, because, surprise, surprise, people can have opinions that don't necessarily support terrorism. I
Yeah.
can say Palestinians should be free without invoking or being accused of supporting Hamas, who I'm very
Right.
clearly not supporting, because I think, yeah, they're fucking awful. But it can also be true that Israel is fucking awful and is treating Palestinians, whether or not they have any links to Hamas, like utter shit.
Yeah. I've got a comment here. Velkin999 said the detentions and deportations are violations of people's human rights, regardless of any perceived law broken. Well, they're a criminal. Who gives an F? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. It's it is just a violation of their rights,
Yeah.
as you know.
And the worst part about this is people will use the fact that someone is a criminal as an excuse to violate their rights. They're like, well, if they're a criminal, who cares? The problem is the state can label whoever the fuck it wants a criminal, because they're
Yeah.
not going through due process. The idea of innocent until proven guilty has gone out the fucking window. So
Yeah.
who the fuck isn't a criminal if the
Right.
administration says they're a criminal? Like, it is the easiest excuse in the world to make, and people will just support it because we have this this notion criminals bad, and therefore whatever happens to criminals is what they deserve. And I'm not saying this is universal, but it's pretty fucking common. And
Right.
like, I wish people would take 2 seconds to remember some of the values that, presumably you were taught when growing up, like the right to due process, like innocent until proven guilty, and all that shit. So I don't know what the fuck to say to people who are willing and ready to just completely throw out such basic principles that fast.
Yeah. No kidding. Yeah. So. Yeah. Also, right-wing media amplified unverified claims that Madawi made anti-Semitic statements in the past, and that somehow justifies his arrest and mistreatment by the government.
Yeah, because, free speech. And I love the fact that they use anti-Semitic statements as the justification, because even if he did, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt and say he did. Their side has done a lot more, harm in their treatment of Jewish people in this country than, a statement or two that might have been perceived as being anti-Semitic because it criticized the nation of Israel, because that's generally what they're talking about. Is,
Right.
if you say anything bad about Israel as a country or the government thereof or the military, the IDF or anything like that, well, that's anti-Semitic because Jewishness and Israeli are the same fucking thing now. Which no,
Somehow.
no.
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise, you've got a lot of Jews, both in Israel and outside of it, being very anti Semitic.
Yeah, no kidding. And of course, you got protesters are being portrayed as radical agitators aligned with anti-American or pro-terrorist movements, which, I mean, anti-American, I mean, you're allowed to be anti-American,
Yeah,
right? Like that's just, you're allowed to do that. And pro-terrorist, well, you covered that before. Like you can be pro-Palestine without being pro-terrorist. It's like not, it's not mutually, or it isn't like inherently combined.
yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. That's a pretty disturbing one to start off. But Vulcan 999 also said the definition of anti-Semitism becoming much more broad has made a good term now effectively useless.
Yeah. I mean,
I agree.
unfortunately, that tends to happen a lot. A term gains popularity for one reason or another, then it gets overused, and then it gets overused to the point where it becomes basically worthless. This is a lot of what the right has claimed the left is doing to words like Nazi and fascist, and I can't always say they're necessarily wrong. I do think a lot of people do misuse those terms as just a general "you're bad" sort of moniker, and the same thing is being done with anti-Semitic. So it's just we have all of these words that should mean something specific, but then they get massively overused outside of their origins and their roots, and just end up losing all their meaning. Which is frustrating because I'm like the English language is already a limited enough tool for communication of ideas as it is.
Yeah.
I'd really rather we not continue to see our own useful vocabulary declining, but sadly, language is not controlled by individuals but by societies, and there's
Yeah.
very little I can do to try and stop that.
Try and convince people to stop using words wrong.
Yeah, like all I can do is use them in the way that seems most correct and accurate to me, and hope it catches on. But seldom does that actually work, and I end up getting swept along with the tide of linguistic evolution, just as everyone else does.
Yeah, for sure. I guess we can move on. Our second story of the evening is Duolingo laying people off because they're switching to AI employees.
Speaking of linguistics,
Right. Yeah, so Duolingo just dropped a bunch of contract workers in favor of AI, calling it part of their push to be an AI first company. Klarna's CEO made similar noise, bragging that their AI tools are replacing dozens of jobs, dressing it up as innovation, but it's the same old thing. Cut costs, pad profits, throw out workers. It's automation getting used to destroy jobs.
yeah, I'm like, and the funniest part about all this is, the right will tend to refer to business owners and businesses generally as job creators, but when they go after money saving things, pretty much always the first thing they cut is workers, because, well, it is true that the largest single line on any business's uh you know or expense statement is labor. So
Yeah, yeah,
it's the easiest thing to cut, especially when you are starting to employ tools that are specifically designed to replace people.
yeah, yeah. I recently, I'm not, I can't go into too much detail, but I recently had to take a test for work to get a raise. And one of the questions was, what is the highest cost for your facility? And I didn't even have to look anything up. I didn't have to read anything. I know that the highest cost of anything is labor. It's
Hmm.
workers, it's employee income. Uh, so that's just how it always is. And when you start cutting jobs in favor of AI, like it seems like you're always going to end up with like less, uh, less, not necessarily less efficient, but less good service. Like it's not going to be as good for the customers,
Yeah,
and then obviously you cut a lot of jobs, so then you're going to have more unemployment if enough companies do that. And like as I'm not sure, uh, it can't be like there's no just transition here, right? Like there's not training for other jobs. There's nobody saying, hey, yeah, well, you're getting laid off, but here's a decent like employment insurance.
yeah.
Like,
Well, the interesting thing is, if I had to guess, and mind you, I have no research to back this up, but if I had to guess what Duolingo is using contract workers for, it's the actual language, uh,
right, right,
the language translation and like learning. The contractors were probably the ones that were actually teaching the developers and product managers in the company, how these languages work. What's the best way to teach these languages to users of the app, things like that. And so what they're effectively doing is they are getting rid of linguistic expertise in exchange for AI. But the problem is, AI doesn't actually understand anything about language. It is a model that just takes massive amounts of language data and then is able to spit it back out in sort of a you know
yeah,
souped up autocomplete is basically what it is. It cannot understand some of the deeper nuances, especially contextual nuances that aren't communicated through speech. If I
right.
if I say, "Could you hand me the glass?" It has no idea what glass I'm talking about unless it actually has sensors in my environment and might be able to see me pointing to something or looking at something. And this is everyday speech. This is the type of normal speech everyday humans will be using to communicate with one another that
Yeah,
don't include all of these, nonverbal cues and all the various signals and contexts that are required to actually develop understanding. It's almost like the AI is an alien listening to random conversations between people in space and trying to gain an understanding of our language that way. It's gonna be lacking.
yeah, for sure. And like you touched on it too, like it's contract workers, right? So
Mhm.
these are not people that they have to pay like benefits to, or like they're the most precarious version of the workers, right? Like they're not actually employees.
Yep.
so so they can lay them off or cancel their contract with no penalties and no payouts.
Yep.
But yeah, absolutely. The language work, it it's pretty fundamental that it's got to be people doing this stuff,
Yeah.
or else it's all going to be all over the place. Like you say,
Yep. And like you note here, the positions are typically filled by women and racial minorities or outsourced labor, and especially for the language work, like they're getting people from all over the world
right,
to help to help teach these languages, and not just the languages themselves, but the way languages are used and the best way to teach their language to another person. So they're not just going after people who know the language. They're going often after language educators to fill in these gaps. And
right.
if those are the people that are being let go, which I suspect is probably a large portion of that, then their quality is going to go downhill extremely quickly. And I kind of hope that this ends up making their product less useful to people, so that
Yeah,
they will feel at least some negative consequences of this decision. Um, but I don't know if they actually care that much about it, or if this it manages to increase overall profits, even if it reduces overall revenue, then yeah,
I
that's
guess. Yeah, that's right. So what's the right saying? so AI boosts efficiency and helps companies stay competitive in a global market.
Bullshit.
Replacing repetitive jobs with AI frees up humans for more meaningful, high-skilled work.
And how are people going to get those so-called high skills taught to them if we're not supporting you know reduced cost education for the people who are getting laid off by this shit? Uh,
Yeah,
it's kind of a catch-22 for them, because like you say it's freeing up humans for more meaningful high skill work, but then you're not giving them or you're not assisting them in the ability to gain the skills needed to perform that work in the first place, and so you just end up in a vicious unemployment cycle.
yeah. And my personal favorite, of course, is the free market should decide how labor is used. Government shouldn't interfere with innovation.
Okay, then government also shouldn't interfere with labor actions and organizing, but
For
we all
sure.
see how well that's gone.
Yeah,
Illegality of general strike coming to mind.
no kidding. Yeah. Uh, oh, what's that? It makes a noise when somebody comments, and
Oh, well
that's
then,
interesting.
fun.
Yeah, so Falcon 999 just said, "Now I'll use an AI chatbot to get through college. That'll be fine, right?"
Next up, Chat GPT University,
Yeah, that's right.
where
Oh,
AI does all the instruction, assigns all the homework assignments, grades all the papers. No humans need be involved. Doesn't matter how good the education is.
that's right. No, that's right. All professors are now in danger of losing their jobs.
Yeah, it's like tenure. Or fuck your tenure. We have AI.
That's right. Yeah. All right. So our next story is U.S. government funding cuts threatens Texas libraries.
Speaking of education,
Speaking of
I,
education,
I don't know. I don't know how I've managed. Like, it's been completely accidental that I get into some sort of segue between the topics.
yeah. Some random geeks says, "Hey, oh hey, it's AnComSciComm."
Yes, it is. Hello.
uh, yeah, so libraries across Texas are facing major funding threats after a Trump executive order put 12.5 million in federal support on the chopping block. At the same time, over 30 bills are moving through the Texas legislature that would restrict what material libraries can carry, targeting books on race, gender, and LGBTQ plus issues. Together, these efforts are part of a broader right-wing push to gut public institutions that offer free access to knowledge, especially for marginalized communities. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, the attack on public education, and generally the attack on access to knowledge and information that is not through social media is it's nothing new. It's just being accelerated by this. But also this is Texas. I'm not surprised by almost any of this. Obviously I'm not supporting of it in any way, shape, or form, because targeting any like major restriction to library materials should always be looked at with massive skepticism, because well, let's see here, we have some historical examples of what happens when things are starting to go in ways that people generally agree are bad, and among those tends to be, oh yeah, accessing or access to education and information, especially about controversial topics. So you know it's just more signaling of the particular direction that we are currently headed in. And
yeah, yeah. No, that's true. Like it has been like a many years project of attacking knowledge, attacking education,
yeah,
like over and over again.
yeah, I
So
mean, you can go back to Reagan to see the beginnings of this, but it's really ramping up shit now. But libraries, as I remember seeing, I think it was several years ago at this point on Twitter. No, I'm not calling it the other thing. Was someone pointing out the fact that libraries are one of the last public spaces that people can exist in
Yep.
without being expected to spend money.
Yeah.
Right. So, you can go into a library, you can utilize its resources. You can spend time inside roaming around or reading or using their computers or whatever. All of it's free. You are not expected to pay for any of it. The only thing you are expected to do is to treat the space and the contents within with respect, and leave it so that other people can utilize it as well.
Yeah.
And like it should really be no surprise that attacking libraries like this is such a common tactic, because of course it is.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. Some Running Geek says they even have DVDs and movies to rent as well.
Oh, not only that, they have video games. My spouse rented, or not rented, borrowed the Stanley Parable for Switch from there, and so we got a couple of weeks to play that. Very fun game. Um, and so it's a great place. Plus, more and more libraries are incorporating things like maker spaces and libraries of things, where you can
Yeah.
go and you can borrow cooking equipment, you can borrow a metal detector, you can borrow binoculars for bird watching or whatever, you can borrow camping gear, you can borrow all sorts of different stuff. Stuff that would normally be fairly expensive to buy, that you're only going to be using in fairly limited circumstances, because you don't need camping equipment all year round. You only need it when you're going camping. And so, having access to that for that limited time and then giving it back so other people can also use it is a far more efficient use of that resource. People love to talk about how efficient capitalism is in utilization of resources. I'm like, no, the fuck it's not. Not compared,
Yeah.
at least not compared to a lot of systems that we could be using. Look up library socialism if y'all haven't, because
Yep.
it's a brilliant idea. There's another podcast. What was it called?
Seriously wrong.
Seriously wrong. Thank you. Yeah, seriously wrong. And then Andrewism recently did a video about that as well. So definitely take a look at those for some
Yeah.
great ideas on how we can use the basic concepts of library science to create systems where we actually can use many of our reusable resources far more efficiently, and giving more people access to them while having to use fewer of them or produce fewer of them in order to meet people's needs and desires for those products and those their usefulness in various contexts.
Right. Velkin999 said, my most recent political group meeting was only possible because we could utilize a local library for a Zoom meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was doing a campaign for a little while. Let me see if I have there it is. So I was doing a light glare. There we go. A
There you
ranked
go.
choice voting campaign for my local town, and a lot of our meetings utilized the library meeting room, so that we had a place in town to get together and talk about what we were planning and organize our campaign and all that. So yeah, it's a great place for all sorts of things, especially and including political meetings. If you can't find other places, or there are cost constraints, because let's face it, especially with doing a lot of leftist organizing, many people don't have the sorts of monetary resources that they would need to be able to meet in even like a bar or a restaurant, because then you're expected to order food, and maybe
Yep.
you don't have you can't afford to be eating out like that. So it's a great place to go to just get get together and be able to talk about those ideas without any sort of expectation of monetary exchange or anything else.
Yeah. A lot of libraries, they have, I don't know, maybe not in the States, but in Canada, a lot of our libraries have like rooms that you can if you just sign up and you get
Yeah.
to use that room now.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah,
yeah.
we have those too. Yeah, like usually it's, you email someone, you say, I want to use this room on this date, during this time window, and they're like, okay, yeah, it's yours. As long
Yep.
as no one else is using it, and usually even if there is, they've got plenty of rooms to go around. So, it's a great resource. And so, when you're starting to see attacks on libraries, as we have been, that should be a big red flag for everyone, that maybe things aren't going the way that we want them to be long term.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm trying to avoid sensationalist or hyperbolic language, but it's very difficult to not invoke those ideas when you just keep seeing more and more that happen every day. The creeping advance of this hellscape that we are slowly but surely sinking into. And so, like, yeah, I've got to find ways to, I've got to find other language to try and describe what it is without using particular buzzwords that I know people are going to react badly to.
Yeah, I
The
suppose,
fact
eh?
that I call myself a communist isn't bad enough.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I've got one of my notes here. Texas and other red states are pulling funding from libraries that work with the American Library Association, accusing the group of pushing a Marxist agenda. This isolates library workers and opens the door to political control.
You also noted
Yeah,
here that a former president of the ALA was, in fact, a Marxist, which really should not be surprising to anyone. Like,
right.
people who support libraries tend to be tend to lean toward leftist values, I imagine.
Yeah,
It's just kind of one of those things that goes with the territory. You're offering free access to information without asking for people to pay for it. Like, you're clearly not going to be heavily into market ideology for that kind of shit.
yeah,
It's not exactly surprising that leftists of all sorts would tend to support libraries, and that the president of the American Library Association might have some stronger leftist beliefs. The current president, to be fair, is not a Marxist.
it's not a Marxist.
And it's also worth noting that, like, nothing about the concept of a library is inherently Marxist or communist or socialist or anything like that. Benjamin fucking Franklin opened the first public library. He was like, for one thing, he lived before any of these ideas. He lived before Marx was born. But for
Right.
another thing, like, they had their own progressive ideas, and yes, contemporarily he was a bit more progressive, but the man still owned slaves. He bought
Yeah.
slaves specifically to free them in a lot of cases, but didn't always do it right away.
Yeah.
Like, he's a complicated historical figure, as are all historical figures. But it's worth noting he was not anywhere near the level of leftist that Corey and myself and lots of other people are. And
Yeah.
he supported, like, he basically, I don't know if he came up with the idea of a public library, because, like, libraries had existed for thousands of years. But creating a whole library system is an idea that he popularized and set into motion, at least here in the United States, and it has clearly spread around the world as we now see it. So it's not to say that libraries are inherently any of these political boondoggles that they love to quote. It's just that they happen to align fairly significantly with our particular values. Not even like the ideological level of ideas that we have, but like more
Right.
core values that are the foundation for leftist ideas that just about anyone can have.
Yeah. Like,
Sorry,
access is
I know I
good.
tend to rant a lot. I
Hey,
apologize. It's just,
no, it's all good. Access is good.
yeah,
And it had to be said, but nowadays making anything accessible makes you a commie.
that's true.
Yeah. Just because commies like to share. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so most of the material under attack, obviously, it involves queer, trans, and BIPOC authors, especially if they write kids' books.
Because we can't have representation in children's media. God forbid they learn about anything other than white dominated Christian heterosexual American values as their as their ideals when growing up.
Yeah, for sure. Funding cuts will hurt many rural communities because they don't have a lot of, like, a library might be their only community resource.
Mm-hmm.
So, while rural communities are often more conservative than cities are considered generally, this is a lot of these people that will be hurt by this is in rural communities.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there are some people who are resisting. So there are some of the libraries are organizing book giveaways and read-ins,
Yep.
stuff like that. So
Yep, because one thing librarians know how to do is fucking organize. They have invented multiple numerical systems for the organization of large quantities of information. You don't think they can organize a few people to resist some bullshit?
yeah,
If you ever need to find someone to organize large community action, go talk to a librarian.
that's a great idea, actually. We should all be talking to our librarians about this stuff.
Yeah, just don't do it in the library because, there's a certain amount of professionalism. They don't talk about politics in the library. Make friends with your librarian. Talk to them outside the library about this shit.
Go for
they
coffee
have
or
the skills that you need. Make friends.
Yeah, for sure. So what's the right saying? Libraries are exposing children to sexually explicit or inappropriate materials that should be restricted.
Like the Bible.
Yeah. They say public funding shouldn't support institutions that promote progressive or woke ideologies.
Then it shouldn't support institutions that support conservative ideologies either.
Yep. Defunding libraries is a way to reduce unnecessary government spending.
Unnecessary, my ass.
Yeah. All those cuts don't mean they're just going into fucking Musk's pocket, right?
I haven't done the research to back this up, but I strongly suspect if you looked at the return on investment that communities get out of their libraries, you would see it massively higher than almost anything else the government does. Because what do libraries provide for free? They provide access to information. They provide access to education. They provide access to job training, to job applications, since everything is now online. So they have, computers that people can go online and they can print out resumes. They can apply for jobs. They can do all this shit at libraries. And the amount of economic activity that libraries directly and indirectly create through their actions almost certainly, trounces any amount of money that actually gets pushed into them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Velka999 said they're good. They're concerned about libraries, but not the tablets that their children are glued to.
No, because the tablets are connected to places like Truth Social. They'll be fine.
Yeah, that's right. As a parent with some younger children, I am absolutely concerned about some of the things that end up on their phones and tablets.
The internet is not a place for children.
No, it is not. Yeah. I guess we can move on, though. Our next story is RCMP whistleblower exposes misconduct. It's a little bit of a longer summary in this one, so bear with me. So in May of 2021, RCMP Constable Sam Sodi filed a formal complaint alleging that several officers in the Coquitlam detachment were sharing racist, sexist, and homophobic messages in private group chats. The internal investigation that followed uncovered thousands of offensive posts, everything from jokes about tasering black people to misogynistic and anti-Indigenous comments. They were circulated on WhatsApp, Signal, and even some official RCMP systems. By June of that year, 3 officers were suspended, and after a lengthy delay, public reporting on the case began to emerge in late 2024. So, 3 years
Yeah.
before it was even really reported. In early 2025, disciplinary hearings began, including testimony from one of the accused officers who admitted the comments were totally inappropriate, but tried to frame them as dark humor used to cope with stress.
No. Dark humor is jokes about suicide and self harm, not about tasering black people and attacking women and indigenous people. Like
Yeah,
there's a difference between hateful humor and dark humor. Dark
for
humor is
sure.
usually pointed inwards. Not to say it's good to have either. Usually it's a signal of something else that's going on, but it is another way that's used to cope with stress. And I'm like, no, you don't get to go and say that I was coping with stress when I talked about how I wanted to rape an indigenous woman on RCMP official systems.
Yeah, no
I'm
kidding.
I'm making up something. I don't have any details in this case. Don't take my off the cuff hyperbolic example as anything concrete.
Don't sue us.
Yeah.
The officers were also attempted to get the conduct board dismissed over an internal email that called them the Three Amigos, but that request was rejected. So as of April 2025, the hearings are still ongoing, and while the RCMP insists it's taking the matter seriously, it's hard to not see this as another example of why internal accountability just doesn't cut it. So for those who don't know, Coquitlam is a city in British Columbia, about 30 kilometers or 18 miles for our American friends, uh, east of downtown Vancouver, and it is one of the region's larger suburban municipalities. The Coquitlam RCMP detachment is the police presence for multiple communities, including Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, Anmore, and Belcara.
Okay, what is it about cops in these extremely progressive areas being such utter shitbags? Like, first
There's
it
got to
was
be some kind of reaction, right?
yeah, first it was cops in New York City sharing shit with ICE. Now it's these fuckwads, being racist, sexist douchebags in the middle of what is probably the most progressive part of Canada, which is saying something given it's Canada.
Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, obviously it's not funny, but it's odd
Yeah,
or strange
it's
to think of
ironic.
like BC as the place where like yeah these cops are so reactive or reactionary,
Yeah.
and yeah, so they of course like they tried to get the charges dismissed because they were like worried about or they because of the Three Amigos comment like uh so you're three cops who buddy along around and like it's not a slur to call you Three Amigos like like I don't even know why they would think that would count as something that would get it dismissed.
Yeah, I don't like. Was that what actually got it dismissed, or
No, because it didn't get
oh,
dismissed. It's still hearings are still in progress, um, which is why it came
oh,
across
oh, I
my
I see now. They were trying to get it dismissed based on a different internal email that called them the
yes,
Three Amigos. I'm like, there were three of you. You're friends. The fact that they're using the Spanish word for friend is like it's a famous movie title, folks. It's a,
right,
it's a cultural reference. It's
yeah,
like, why is that? That is absurd. Like, y'all think you're gonna get off on all the shit you did just because someone had a mildly funny name for you? I do not understand people sometimes.
yeah, that's right, yeah, for sure. Now, there's, I mean, obviously, there's like a deep culture of like being shitty inside of policing in general, and yes, even within the RCMP, for those who who are not sure about the Mounties. There's been like over the years there's been stories about people who have been killed in wellness checks and stuff, just like in the States. Like our cops are still cops, and they still put Punisher stickers on their cars, and they still they do some wild shit.
Yep. Constable Benton Fraser would be disappointed, and anyone who's watched the TV show Due South understands that reference.
Yeah. Um, one of the things that surprised me was that some of this stuff was done on official RCMP systems, um, not just in a secure chat, like on a WhatsApp or a Signal chat or something. So that seems like maybe it should have been flagged earlier. It shouldn't have taken a whistleblower to like bring this up.
Yeah, I would love to know a little bit more about the nature of the comments that were specifically posted on RCMP systems. My guess, if I had to guess, was probably like police reports and shit that don't get reviewed unless there's some issue with them. But you'd think maybe some keyword flagging wouldn't go amiss.
Right, right. If you want to use AI for something, use it to keep cops paperwork accountable or messaging systems accountable.
Yeah,
Like I'm sure
yeah,
that would
like
be easy enough for
yeah, like that's a great way. That's a great use of AI. Use it to look for inappropriate jokes that are being shared around in official
Sure.
systems. You
That
know,
way you don't have to fire people who have language expertise. But yeah, that's kind of all I have about that. I mean, the hearings are still ongoing, so maybe I can check in back on it another time.
yeah, I'm actually surprised. You have it noted here that the right wing in Canada isn't really saying much about this. My guess is if they were, it would be largely centered around the fact that British Columbia is this massively progressive place on the left coast and them laughing at it. But
Yeah.
they also love their cop apologetics. So it's
Yep.
let's go with pleasantly surprising that there's little to no pushback on this.
Yeah.
Oh, my little
And,
jumping spider friend has decided to descend on his web. I've had a jumping
oh,
spider living on my desk for the last day. So,
oh, cool.
yep.
That's awesome. One of the things I did note about this too is that usually in cases of suspension in the RCMP, uh, officers are still paid. So
Oh, yeah.
these guys have been paid for the last 4 years. Well, they're being investigated and having hearings, and yeah, for being shitty. They're still getting paid, but now they don't have to work. Which is, I mean, don't work. If you're a cop, don't work. Like,
Yeah.
but we shouldn't be paying them either.
Yeah. As a line from a song written by a friend of mine goes, the only good cop isn't one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. So this is I guess, our fifth main story for the evening.
Yep.
Uh,
Good old smarmy Carney. I
I
realize that's a
apologize.
loose rhyme, but it was the best I could come up with
Yeah.
quickly.
Smart. Yeah, that's not bad actually. Yeah, Mark Carney is the Prime Minister of Canada after last week's election. It's I guess what is he's a technocrat. He's a banker. He was the governor of the Bank of Canada. He was the governor of the Bank of UK. Um, and yeah, he's never been elected in anything before this. He was never a politician. He was just always a technocrat, an, a banker, and like the governor of banks.
So when Trudeau stepped down just before the election and Carney was declared PM there, like he wasn't at that time a member of parliament?
No,
Okay.
no,
Interesting.
no.
Didn't
Yeah.
realize that.
Oh yeah, that. So I might be mistaken on this, but if I recall correctly, the prime minister doesn't have to be in a winning in a riding. They don't have to
Oh,
have a
okay.
seat in a riding,
Oh,
but the
okay.
leader of the opposition does.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, so in,
Interesting.
yeah, so yeah, bringing it back to before the show, we were talking a little bit about Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah.
He lost his riding. He was the leader of the Conservative Party, and he lost his riding. But now there's a guy who's going to step down so that he can run in the by-election and take that seat, so that he can maintain his status as the leader of the Conservative Party.
Good old party politics.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
That's
So
it's
some other guy has to give up his seat just so I can remain leader of this party.
yeah,
Uh,
it's it's wild. Like the NDP also basically doesn't. They have 7 seats out of
yeah.
343, so they lost official party status. I know electoralism isn't really that
No,
big a
but like
deal.
I
It's not
still
super cool,
yeah, I still keep up with it because it is ultimately the way our current system runs. What's interesting to me about this is this whole concept of of official party status being lost. Like that's not really a thing in the US as far as I know, because like we don't have parties, official parties on the national level. We have, organizations that are the parties, but ultimately
right?
parties only really exist on the state level, and just about anyone can form a party. And like they're, they official parties are official parties. You don't have to have, like, most parties in the US don't have seats in any, at any level of government, but they still exist as official parties because they're officially registered with their respective states. So this idea of official party status is kind of weird to me. What like what is the difference between an official party and someone belonging to, say, the NDP, who is no longer, which is no longer considered to be an official party, but like is still clearly a group of politicians who have a particular shared set of values and policy proposals.
Here, I'll look up the specifics to make sure, but I think there's some official stuff like they don't get to engage in they don't get the same resources that like parties that have an official status get. Uh, I'll take a look here just to make sure I know what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, like the funding thing is definitely a thing in the U.S. Like you do have to win like a certain number of or a certain percentage of votes in the previous, like I'm thinking for Massachusetts because that's where I live. You have to win a certain number of votes in the last gubernatorial election, for instance. I think it's like 10% or something, in order to qualify for public funding. Like, state funds that are made available to political candidates can be claimed now by candidates from your party if they have met that particular threshold.
Okay, so according to Chris Cochran, an associate professor of political science at the University of Toronto, the main thing is that it means a significant loss of parliamentary funds for the party,
Okay.
which is things like support for having a research office for the party, staff support that they get based on party size, and even for smaller things like phone plans for staffers and a support for a party office. And they don't get to ask questions in question period, which is
Oh,
when the parliament is yeah, they don't have
that's messed up.
question privileges. Yeah, so
That's messed up.
yeah, I recall that specifically from uh, official status also gives more opportunities to ask questions,
Gotcha.
so they don't have as many opportunities.
Okay, so
Not
they do
not
still get
not
opportunity.
zero.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm like, if you're not an official party, you can't ask any questions in Parliament. That's kind of fucked.
yeah,
How exactly are you expected to advocate for your constituents if you don't have that
right.
ability?
Yeah, no, that would be really bad if it was zero.
Oh yeah, so
But
good to
yeah,
know.
yeah, I guess there's not really a whole ton more to say about the election and whatnot. I have a few notes about what the right is saying, but um, uh, because I live in Saskatchewan, my premier Scott Moe and our neighbor's premier Alberta's premier Danielle Smith were talking about referendums for separatism, Western separatism.
Mm,
So they want to Smith almost advocated for it, but Scott Moe merely said that he would never refuse any any referendum on separatism.
okay.
Conservative media are circulating claims about offshore tax shelters, connections to China, and a lack of transparency, painting him as ethically compromised and out of touch with working class Canadians. I don't actually disagree with that.
Yeah, no shit. A big time technocrat businessman has shady dealings in his past? You don't say. Like, do you have a ballpark of what this man's net worth is?
That's a good question. Mark Carney net estimated to be around 6.97 million as of 2025.
That's a lot lower than I expected, quite frankly. If he's this big business guy, like I was expecting hundreds of millions, if not billions, but still, you don't generally get that kind of that kind of net worth without being involved in shady dealings. So this is not
Well,
particularly surprising, but this is
this
one
is
of those
interesting
times.
though.
Oh, go ahead.
I just found this. I don't know what universitymagazine.ca is, but but they claim that Mark Carney's net worth is estimated at 300 million.
Oh, well,
So
interesting. That's quite
different numbers from different sources.
yeah. But shit, now I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, but this is one of those few cases where the right will use leftist talking points as a
Yes.
way to attack the center because it gives it gives the appearance that they actually give a shit about things like ethical concerns and corruption. They don't.
No.
They're just as dirty often, if not more so, than the people they're criticizing. But it's a good way to criticize them. And yes, I realize I'm doing the whole tu quoque or YouTube sort of
Right.
argument, but you have to point out that like they don't actually give a shit. This is the thing. They don't give a shit. So while they can and often do levy legitimate concerns and criticisms of their opponents, you just have to remember that like it's not a sincere criticism because they only give a shit when it's the other guy doing it. As soon as their guys do it, no, they'll start defending it or hiding it or whatever. They don't actually take accountability. But it's easy to use that sort of accountability against your opponent.
Yeah, wasn't it Hassan Piker? He said something about the only people who are allowed to criticize capitalism are the right, because everything they say complain about capitalism, it should come from a socialist perspective. But
yes, but if you hear it coming from a socialist, then you immediately dismiss it. As soon as you hear it coming from a right winger, you're like, you might be onto something there.
Yeah, exactly. But when they complain about the elite,
as soon as you try to connect those two very closely neighboring dots, they're like, no, it's supposed to go up around this way.
That's right. Yeah.
Just like the connect, like they clearly failed to connect the dots in kindergarten when they were trying to figure out how all this shit worked.
Yeah, for sure. It was the same class as sharing, so they forgot how that worked. Velkin999 said, separatism is an incredibly bad idea with Trump floating the 51st state garbage. Yes, I agree.
Well, to be entirely fair, I feel like A, Canada might actually be better off getting rid of Alberta, and B, the U.S. would love to get Alberta. So, it might be a win-win there. In all honesty, yeah, I know that Alberta is a huge economic driver for Canada, and them separating would actually be a huge hit to the country's economy, but,
see how it goes.
Yeah. What we should do is the U.S. should lose Texas, y'all lose Alberta, they'll come together in a sort of, pair of exclaves of their own country. They'll be happy.
Yeah, that's right.
Happy as pigs and shit.
They can be oil states on their own. And
and then we can come invade them for their oil.
That's right. There you go. Yeah, for sure. It's actually, I don't know what came of it, but Mark Carney was supposed to be with Donald Trump today. So we'll see what happens, I guess.
Okay.
I'm sure I'll find out after we're done recording.
Indeed. And chances are it probably won't be great.
Yeah, no, probably not.
Yeah.
All right. So that's our main 5 stories. I got a couple quickish ones. So between April 2nd and April 7th, there was a massive storm system in the U.S. Midwest and South, spawning over 150 tornadoes and widespread flooding. 24 people were killed, and power was knocked out to hundreds of thousands. And there were some great mutual aid groups that were involved. The Y'all Squad, Mutual Aid Disaster Relief, and Convoy of Hope provided food, supplies, cleanup, and help to those who needed it.
Awesome. Glad to hear it.
Yeah. And UK-based climate activist group Just Stop Oil is officially disbanded. They claimed victory following the government's decision to cease oil and gas extraction from the North Sea, which they say was their goal. Yeah, so they were the people who threw tomato soup on Van Gogh or whatever.
Yeah.
So, and they blocked a lot of roads. And they pissed a lot of people off. And I know that like a lot of people I was reading were often like, oh, why would they do this? Even though they may agree with them politically, they're saying these things have no effect.
Yeah.
But they reached their goal. They got what they wanted.
I mean, yeah, but I feel like that's probably got a lot more to do with the Tories' incompetence leading to a labor resurgence in the UK, and Labour's values on this more closely matching with their own. But like, okay, so on one hand, I never thought their tactics were particularly effective. I thought they were, it's a lot of flash and showmanship. But I never thought it particularly effective, and I do not buy their claims of victory just because a Labour government got elected and happened to align with them on this. Because as soon as the next general election comes around, if Labour loses that majority and it goes back to being a Tory government, they're going to go right back to doing oil and gas extraction from the North Sea, and you'll be right back on it. Like this is the failure of liberalism and electoralism in general when it comes to making political change. Is as soon as the winds shift, you declare victory, and what happens when those same winds shift back?
Yeah, that's fair enough. Like absolutely, it has something to do with the collapse of the Tories for sure.
But on the other hand, I will say that like what people disliked about their tactics were exactly what made their tactics useful, at least for getting in the public eye. Because the shit they said, the fact that people care more about an ultimately undamaged artwork than they do about the biosphere slowly dying, might signal that a shift of priorities is needed, right? Yes, artwork is great. It is an amazing cultural heritage that we have, and to preserve that heritage for future generations to enjoy and to teach them about what came before, that's great. But it should not outweigh, the actual efforts to save humanity's future and our ability to continue thriving on this planet.
I often thought of them as like, while I might not see, some of their tactics as particularly effective, I wasn't doing anything. So I was like, at least they're doing something.
Yeah, I'll give that. I will give them that.
So, and then I've got a named segment. I called this Collapse Watch. So this is the part of the show where we check in on the part of the world that's falling apart somewhat faster than expected. And basically I just wanted to say, like, this is Mark Carney being put in charge is not a relief. This is just another step towards the same problems that we had before under Trudeau and under Joe Biden and under Donald Trump, and even if Polyev would have won, our problems are the same problems that they would have been before. The climate issues, the failing, economies everywhere, and we aren't better off.
Yeah, in changing from Trudeau to Carney, you're just changing from Obama to Biden.
Right.
It's a sideways shift, if maybe a little bit, a smidge to the right in some ways. It is a maintenance of the status quo, which, when the alternative is fascism, is not the worst thing that could happen. So, what is the word? There's a phrase I'm looking for, which is something like, thanks for small miracles or something like that. I don't remember the exact saying because words, what are they? I can't figure them out. But, we'll see. It's nice that Polyev and the Conservatives aren't in charge, so that Canada can go with the light version of what America does, which is usually what they're good for. But, at least in this particular case, Canada gets to continue being a liberal hellhole instead of an increasingly fascist hellhole.
Yep, that's right. And I guess Australia recently just elected their same guy again.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not descending into fascism either.
Yep,
but
they're liberal, or they're I wanted to say they're liberals, but then I remember the liberals in Australia are the Conservative Party. Their Labour Party did win, and then I think there's a New Zealand election coming up soon as well. So they've always tended to swing fairly left anyway. So that is not likely to deviate this time around, as far as I understand.
I keep telling the right wingers who comment on my stuff, the Liberals are in fact a conservative party.
It's true. It's true. It's just, they're a little bit more a little more blatant about it in Australia.
Yeah, that's right. So I guess that's it. Where can people find you if you want to be found?
I mean, I don't mind being found, but there aren't a lot of places you can find me these days. I have a Blue Sky account. Do I check it? No. I'm on Discord a lot, but usually in private servers and group chats with people that I know. So, if you want to find me, use my name. I'll get emails if you message me on Blue Sky or on Twitter for that matter. Yes, my account's still active. I never use it, but I do occasionally get emails when people DM me. So if you want to get a hold of me, that's probably the best way to do it. I would use Blue Sky over Twitter, but, it's your choice.
Yeah, I think most people that follow the show are Blue Sky people and not Twitter people.
Yeah, I'd imagine. I would imagine. I also used to host my own stream called the Anarchist Laboratory. I still have the domain name, so, AnComSciComm at anarchistlaboratory.live. I know it's a long email address, but at least it's easy to remember, or I should hope it is.
Yep. Yeah, that's not bad.
So,
all right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us in this stream. Let us know how you thought it went. Like, this is just the first time we're doing this particular thing, so we'll maybe make some adjustments, or maybe we'll keep doing it the same as we did today. We'll see how it goes.
Awesome. All right. Thank you very much. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.